Okay, so let's start with the xAPI statement as usual. With the JavaScript file. We're going to add some things here. And if you've only been to the awesome, Will. Okay, if you've only been to the first 3 sessions, then you'll have a few less parameters up here. So, just know that yours might look a little different. We're going to make this work for everyone. So what we want to do is we want to add this result object to the xAPI statement. So if you were here last week, we've already added this. If you were not here last week, we want to add the result object as a child to this to the main statement object. So we have an actor, a verb, an object, and now we're adding this result object. I'll show you how we do that if you don't have it already. I'm just going to delete mine. So you look at the closing curly bracket for the object, you add a comma after it and do a line break. We're going to add this result object and then just add those curly brackets to make it an actual JSON object. So what we added last week was we added this response. And I think we were using a parameter called open text. Oh no, we actually want it to be user response, I'm pretty sure. So how we did that is we passed into the function the storyline variable that's holding the user's response to these open text questions. And then we use some JavaScript. So we set that to a JavaScript variable called user response, and we place that down here in the statement. So if you didn't do that last week, don't worry. We are going to focus on something else right now. So you can add this response object and just leave it as like a placeholder if you weren't here last week. If not, just leave it how we had it. And we're going to add something new to this result object, and that is this score object. Okay. So just like how we added this result object as a child to the main statement, we're going to add this score object as a child to result. And if you don't have the response here, it will just look like this. Everyone good with that? So inside of this score object, we can include multiple different pieces. So again, we went over this briefly in week 1, but we'll have a minimum. So I'm just going to leave placeholders for right now. I'm just going to add I'll just make everything 0 for now. So we can have a minimum, we can have a maximum, we can have a raw score, and we can have a scaled score. Okay. So just to demonstrate this, let's say we have a 10-question quiz and the user got 5 questions correct. So the minimum possible would be 0. If you get 0 questions correct, the minimum is 0. Maximum would be 10. Okay, since it's possible to answer all 10 correct, that's what we want here. Now the raw score is however many the user got right. Okay, so that would be 5 in this case. If I answer 5 questions right, my raw score is 5. If I answer 10 questions right, my raw score is 10. It's pretty intuitive. And the scaled score would be like the percentage, like what you actually get on. Say if you're taking the quiz, if you got 5 questions right, you got a 50%. So we would express this as a decimal. And if we converted that to a percentage, it would be 50%. So the maximum this can be is 1 for the scaled score, which would be a 100%, and the minimum is a 0. Is everyone good with that? These properties here are determined by the xAPI spec. And these are the 4 that this score object can take: min, max, raw, and scaled. So this is obvious. So if you're going through a quiz in a storyline course, for example, this is where you would be holding the data about how the user is performing on the quiz. So this response part of the xAPI statement is a decimal required and scaled. No, I think 1 would be fine. Yeah, that would be fine. This would be fine. This would be fine. I don't know if the LRS would like automatically like parse like a fraction. I don't really know. But I would just stick with this. This works. Now, I want to focus on this response part. So let's say we didn't have this already. After score, we would add response. And this is where we would actually include the user's response to the question. Okay. So we used this last week to capture the, what they actually entered in the open text variable, in the open text input, sorry. But we can also capture the user's response to a question like this, a multiple choice question. If they were answering choice A, choice B, or choice C, we would include that at this part of the xAPI statement. We wouldn't use the choice as the object. The object ID would be the question that they're answering. And we're going to get into that once we hop over to storyline. So there's only one more piece of this. And again, it doesn't matter what order you have these properties in. It could be response at the top, then score, and then this last one, which is success. Okay. And success is just a true or false value. That's all it can be. I mean, it can be a variable, but that variable has to equal either true or false. Okay. So this property right here lets you know if the user basically got it right or not. So if you're answering a question, it's going to tell you whether or not they answered the question correctly. And if we're sending the statement about the quiz as a whole, this property would tell you whether or not they passed or failed the quiz. Everyone good with that? These are the three properties we're worried about today: the score, response, and success. So if we're all on the same page about what they're doing conceptually, we can actually start integrating this with our xAPI statement. Okay. I'm just going to ask a quick question. I'm going to add a quick poll, okay? So I want to know where everyone is. Like, is everyone already up to speed? Was everyone here for last week's session, or do we still have some people who did not do who aren't up to date? First 3, first 4, or first 5 sessions or tutorials. So just look at the poll really quick, and if everyone can answer that, if you're trying to follow along, I'll know how to better suit this. Because yeah, if everyone's done all 5 of the last tutorials or live streams, then we can be a bit more streamlined with this. Okay. Someone first 4, a couple first 4. Okay, well, just feel free to ask questions. Okay, I'm probably not going to tailor every instruction for like which stage you're in. So just ask a question if you get left behind. So let's do this. So what we want to identify here are what parts of this result object now are going to change based off of what the user is doing in the course. Okay. So we used all of these placeholders for, the object description, because based off of what they're clicking or what they're viewing, that will change what the statement says. If we look at this, the minimum score for any quiz we're giving, it's probably pretty safe to say that that minimum is going to be 0. So this doesn't need to change. Minimum can stay 0. For the maximum, maybe we know how many questions there are in this course right now. Yeah, we can see we have 1, 2, 3 questions. But maybe I want to add some questions down the line, and I'm probably not going to want to fiddle around in my code when it comes time to do that. So I think a nice solution to this, an easy solution to this, is we're going to create a new variable in storyline. So hop over to your storyline file, go to manage project variables, and let's create a new variable called I think we'll call it max score. I want to make sure I named it the same thing in my tutorial. Yeah, we're just going to name it max score. I capitalized that S. We're using camel case. And we'll make it a number variable. And our max score in this case, well, we actually only have one multiple choice question, which is all that's going to be graded. So let's say I'm going to add a couple more of those multiple choice questions, and we'll make our max score 3. Okay. So this is just going to be a simple 3-question quiz. So once you've made that max score variable in storyline, then whenever we add new questions, all we have to do is just change this in storyline. And the way that's going to work, we're going to pull that value from storyline the same way we pulled the user's name and email address and even that open text response answer. So let's just look up here where we're naming these variables in the code file. So we're defining player, uname.js, uemail.js. We're going to add a new variable right beneath uemail.js, and we're going to call it maxScore.js. And that's going to equal player.getVar, and then in parentheses and quotes, max score. And make sure that's whatever is in these parentheses here is spelled and capitalized just as it is in storyline. Okay. So this should be, why is the default value 3 and not 1? It would be 1 right now, but I'm going to add a couple of more questions right here. So I'm going to just duplicate this and make two more questions just so we can demo this functionality better. But yeah, right now when I only have this 1 question, the max score is 1. But I'm going to add 2 more. That's why I made it 3. But the important thing is to make sure that you are adding this code right here to get the value from that variable, because you can change that variable really easy in storyline. So once you've added this constant maxScore.js equals player.getVar max score, we're going to scroll down, and where we have 10 as this placeholder for max, we're just going to replace it with maxScore.js. So now whenever we execute this code, the value here will be whatever value we have as this variable. Default value of your new variable should be the number of questions you have. Yes, it would be the number of questions in your quiz or assessment. That's right. It would be the maximum possible number that the user can get correct. So, I have these 2 questions, but there is no right or wrong answer here. This is what was your favorite part of the course and what was your least favorite part of the course. So we're not going to be, this isn't going to affect the user's score in any way. This is just some qualitative information for us to improve the course. Okay, so that settles the max score. So now we need to, the user's score is obviously going to fluctuate based off of what question they're on, whether or not they're answering the questions correctly or incorrectly. So let's add another variable in storyline, and instead of calling it max score, let's add a new one called user score. And we'll set this type to a true or false, or to a number variable. And the default value will be 0. So same thing with the capitalization. The S in score is capitalized, and user is all lowercase. So once we've made that, let's hop back over to our code. We have to add a similar line right beneath where we define this maxScore.js variable. Let's make a new one called userScore.js, and that will equal player.getVar userScore. And just like we replaced the max score placeholder, we'll replace this 5, where this raw score placeholder with userScore.js. We'll have to manipulate that variable in storyline as the user answers questions correctly or incorrectly. So we'll get there soon. Let's just finish this up. And there's one more thing we want to do here. So the scaled score, that's just, it's basically just a fraction. It's basically how many did the user get right over how many could the user have gotten right, right? So if the user has 10 right and the maximum score is 10, the scaled score will be 1. If the user's only got 5 right and the maximum score is 10, it's a fraction, 5 over 10, so 0.5. So we're going to write a little bit of JavaScript to do this. So we'll scroll back up. We'll just keep all these score variables next to each other. We'll just call this one scaled score, and that will equal user score JS divided by, and to do divided by in JavaScript is just this / divided by max score JS. Okay, is everyone good with that? Once you've written that code to make sure it's dividing this user score by the max score, we just need to replace this 0.5 placeholder with scaled score. And now this will update dynamically as long as we're incrementing that variable appropriately in storyline, which we'll get to next, I guess. We can do that next. All right. So once you've added those pieces, if you haven't, just let me know in chat. Some of our cons do not have JS and some do. You don't need the JS. You can probably get rid of this. I think I just add it just because we have this storyline variable called max score. So I'm just adding the JS to make it clear that this is the JavaScript variable we're using. But I don't think it would affect anything if you just got rid of that JS. But yeah, that's why I added it. It's definitely not required. You can name variables whatever you want. We can name this just like a random, letters if we want. So you just need to make sure that whatever you name it here is what it's named in the code. And it's not overlapping with another variable. That's the big thing. But that was my reasoning for why I added the JS. Yeah. Okay. So now in storyline, let's just set up our quiz a bit more. So we have, it is clear to distinguish the storyline variable. Yeah, right. Cool. So I'm going to add a couple of questions here. So last week we did question 1, question 2, and question 3. I kind of want to redo this a little bit. I want questions 1, 2, and 3 to be a multiple choice question. And I want these ones to be like, just survey questions or questions 4 and 5. So let's set up this question 1 first. So we know based off of our cheat sheet that the answer is C. So I'm going to click on answer C right here, or choice C, and I'm going to create a new trigger. I want it so that when the user clicks this, we adjust a variable. We want to adjust the user score variable. And we don't want to set it. We want to add 1 to the user's score. Okay, so everyone see what I did there? What we want to do is we want to make it so that when the user selects the correct choice, we're adding 1 to that user score variable. So I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And the only other thing, look at the order of how these triggers are. Right now, we're executing the JavaScript to send the statement. Then we're jumping to the next slide. And then we're adding 1 to the user's score. Right now, that 1 is never going to get added because storyline is going to jump to the next slide. And then it's not going to have access to this trigger anymore. So go ahead and move this trigger up to at least above that jump to the next slide trigger. All right. So we're good with that. So now, naturally, when the user answers this question, if they select A or B, it's just going to send that xAPI statement and jump to the next slide. Or if they select C, it's going to add 1 to the user's score, send the xAPI statement, and jump to the next slide. So, and that would reflect itself in the xAPI statement. So there are a couple of things, though, that I want to do before we go ahead and just start duplicating these slides, because we have a couple of things we didn't address. So we have this user response variable that we added last week to capture the user's open text response, right? So we can look at the code up here that's doing that. I can paste this in the chat because this is our starting point. So So what we're doing, again, I mentioned this earlier, we're passing in the variable that we want to pull the value from storyline. Okay. Now, we call this open text var, but we could also store the response to this question in a variable, and then if we pass that in, it will get that variable's value and it will include it in, right here in the result response property. So this doesn't only work with open text responses, it works with any kind of question. Okay, and let me show you what I mean by that. So let's look at the xAPI statement we're sending from this open text response slide. Okay, so here are all of the arguments. So I'm going to paste this too for people who it might be difficult to see over here. But okay, so first we're saying yes, we're using this answered verb. Here's the verb ID. It's question 2. Here's the ID for question 2. Here's the object description, question 2 in Devlin's sample course. Here is the type, the activity type is a question. But here's where, at the last argument, is where we pass this variable, user's favorite part. Okay, and that's the variable that's holding this open text response, right? So we're going to use a similar treatment for question 1. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to question 1. Well, let's look at what's happening when the user selects choice C. Here's the JavaScript that we're passing. Last week, we decided to pass just this placeholder variable, and we created that in Storyline. You see, we have this placeholder variable. It's not equal to anything. We just needed to pass something so that when our code tries to, when our code right here tries to get that variable, if we're not passing it anything, the code is going to break right here, and that's what we found last week. So we just use this simple placeholder variable that doesn't pass anything. But instead, what if we store the user's response to this question in a variable and then pass that variable in this xAPI statement? And that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so let's create a new variable. So I'm going to call it just Q1 response. The lowercase q, the number 1, capital R, and then the rest of the word response. And it will be a text variable. So I'll go ahead and press OK once we've created that. And now for choice C, I'm going to create a new trigger. I'm going to make it, we're going to adjust the variable Q1 response to equal to value C. We'll just put C. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. Make sure we use this arrow key on the triggers panel to move that trigger up so that it's executing before we jump to the next slide. And then I'm just going to copy that trigger. I'm going to paste it onto choice B. And I'm going to make sure that instead of setting Q1 response to C, we're going to set it to B. And I'll move that trigger up above the jump to next slide trigger. And I'll do the same treatment for choice A. We're going to set Q1 response to value A. And we're going to make sure that trigger is executing before we jump to the next slide. Is everyone on board with what we just did there? There's only one more piece we need to do. We need to change the JavaScript on each of these so that instead of passing this placeholder variable, we're going to pass this Q1 response variable. So between the quotes, just swap out placeholder with Q1 response. And I'm going to do that for choice A, B, and C for each of those execute JavaScript triggers. All right. So how are we looking with that? Any questions about what we did or why we did it? Because once you have this set up, now what's going to happen is that when we press choice C, it's going to send an xAPI statement that not only shows that the current score is 1, but it's also going to tell us that the response to this question was C. And you can see how this would be useful when you're looking at the data for a question that's a bit more complex, where it's not what's the answer, but like an actual question, like where would you put this piece in the xAPI statement? Like, and then the answers would be actual substantive things like the result response property or the object ID property. And then you can actually see that right here in the statement when you're looking at it in the LRS. Do we need to replace the placeholder on the cheat sheet? No, because for the cheat sheet, when they press this, there is no response. So by viewing the cheat sheet, they're not responding to the question. So this result response property holds responses to questions pretty much. I mean, in the simplest form. Okay, so for the cheat sheet, we still don't need a response here because all they're doing is viewing a cheat sheet. But what I do want to do is add a couple of more questions to this quiz. I want to make this a three question multiple choice quiz. We're not going to focus on this too much. I don't think it's really important for this tutorial because we covered this already. And if you do want to learn how to do the open text responses, just look at last week's tutorial. But I'm going to just duplicate question 1. I'm going to name this one question 2. I'll just say, what is your favorite color? Red, blue, and yellow. So again, you can make this say whatever you want. Notice question 1 is still intact. I'm just doing question 2. And there are a few things we need to change with each of these answer choices. So the first thing is, notice we were setting this we were changing this Q1 response variable for question 1. You actually could just name this variable like question response, and you can override it each time the user gets to a new question. Obviously, if you do that, then you're not going to be able to like display the user's answer to each question later in the session or anything like that. And if the user goes back to a previous question, it's going to mess things up too. But we're just going to keep this simple. We're not going to get too in depth. I'll just go ahead and make a new variable called Q2 response. Q2 response. And I'll make a new one called Q3 response because I know I want this to be a 3-question quiz. So with those variables created, the first thing I'm going to do is change the set Q1 response to value A. So instead, we want to set Q2 response to value red. Same thing with blue. We want to set Q2 response to value blue. And you don't need to actually create these additional slides if you don't want to. I just want to show how we can get some varied scores on the quiz. And I think it's going to be, not as good to do that with just one question. So again, for the third one, we're setting Q2 response to value yellow. Instead of what is your favorite color, is what is the correct color? Okay, we need this to be a true or false thing. The cheat sheet will say the answer is blue. Okay. So now instead of adding 1 to the user's score when they select yellow, we're going to add 1 to the user's score when they select blue. Make sure I move that above, jump to next slide trigger. Now, we're still missing something here. Okay. Do we need to replace? Okay. So let's open up some of this JavaScript we're executing. So if we look at it, we're still saying that the user answered choice C as the object, okay? And like I told you all before, we don't want the user's choice to be in the object or the object ID. That's going in the result response property. So I should have changed this before we duplicated the first slide, but let's change this. So we don't want this to be choice C. We want this to be question 2. And instead of example.com/choice C, it's example.com/question-2. I'm going to do that for each of these, and I'm going to have to do it for the first question. I'm going to do it really fast. So again, now that we're storing the user's choice in the result response property, so we do not need it in the object ID, which is where it's currently sitting, with these parameters. And again, we also want to update these. If you're doing the second quiz slide or quiz question slide, we don't want to pass Q1 response as the as the variable that has the user's response. We want to pass in Q2 response. So we're just changing the JavaScript triggers, making sure that the last argument is Q2 response. And now I'm just going to switch this back up for question 1. Instead of passing in those choices, we're passing in question 1 for both the object and the object ID. Almost done here. One more. All right, we're in good shape with these first 2 questions. I do want to add a third one really quickly, so it's going to be 2 seconds. Let's do it. Question 3, what do we want this one to be? What is the correct number? And we'll make it 22, 45, and 17. Okay, we're just going to do the same thing. This is question 3 now instead of question 2. So again, every time we change one of these things, it's basically sending a whole new xAPI statement. So you can see, it is a little, it is a little manual, like how we have to go in and do this, but we're changing 2 values now instead of rewriting code to send more xAPI statements. So it becomes almost, almost as simple as just using a new storyline variable. And again, while I'm changing these question 3 execute JavaScript triggers, I'm just going to change that last argument to Q3 response now instead of Q2 response. And same things with the set variables. Instead of set Q2 response to red, we're going to set Q3 response to 22. For the second option, we're going to change Q3 response to 45. And for the third option, we're setting Q3 response to 17. And we'll say the correct option is 45 because we'll just leave it as adding 1 when the user selects that B option. Okay. So we're in pretty good shape for these first 3 questions. There is one more part of this xAPI statement now. And so the cool thing about this is, if the user answers all 3 of these questions right, this scaled score will be 1. If they answer 2 of them right out of 3, it will be 0.666. And if they answer only 1 right, it will be 0.3333. So that's all automatic now once we've got that set up. The last thing we're looking at here is this success property. Okay. And again, the idea with this is that when the user answers an individual question, like we're doing here, the user answered question 3, we want that success property to be true if they pick the correct response or false if they pick the incorrect response. And at the same time, when the user gets through the entire quiz, so maybe I add a really simple results slide right here. Results. We're not going to add anything too crazy here. It's just going to be a slide. We don't even need to really show the results. But what we are going to do is we'll probably want to send an xAPI statement when the user gets to this slide saying whether or not they passed the quiz. So I want to show you something. So in my tutorial, the way we handled this is we just had one variable called user did pass. And if the scaled score was above 0.8, and 80% is passing, then the success property was true. And if it was below 80%, the success property was false. So I realized today when I was looking at this, is this success property only changes if you go through my tutorial, based off of your relation to the passing score for the quiz as a whole. But we don't pass in a true or false variable based off of how the user does on each question. Okay? So we can take this we can do this a couple of ways. We can focus just on passing true or false based off of how they answered, an individual question. We can do it how I did it in the tutorial and just have the success property be whether or not they're passing the entire quiz. Or we can try to do both, and that's going to be a bit more complex, and we're going to figure it out on the session right now. So we have 22 minutes. How do we want to spend it? Whoever's most vocal in chat determines the fate of this session. Okay, Brian is, let's pull this over here. So let's see. Can we use the min score to cycle the learner through the quiz until the minimum is achieved? So again, the minimum score is 0 because the user might get none of them correct. So min here, that's not necessarily minimum required to pass. That's just minimum possible. Okay. And yeah, right. You can handle something like what you're talking about in storyline. Like if the user doesn't pass, require them to try again. We would have like a retry button here. It would set that user score variable to 0, and it would kick them back to question 1. What's the best way? So the correct way to do it would be to make sure that this value right here changes based off of whether the user answers the question correctly or not. All right. So let's think about how we want to do that. Okay. So I'm thinking we would want to add another parameter that we could add to our xAPI statement. Like right after this, it would be like an incorrect or it would be a correct or incorrect or like a true false, right? So that's what we could do for the question one. So let's do that. So I'm going to add another parameter up here called question correct. Or just to keep it more concise, because we're getting a lot of parameters up here. We're going to clean this up in, I think, 2 weeks. Oh, I think next week is where we're measuring duration. And that's like, if that is next week, that's like my favorite one of all time. So next week is going to be a good one. But yeah, so up here in the send statement function, we're going to add another parameter, qCorrect. And again, for the people who weren't here last week, this is really important. We want to make sure we have this open text var parameter, and we have this line of code right here. So I'm just going to paste that in case you weren't here last week, because we're relying on this code that we set up to capture the user's response to these multiple choice questions. It would probably be better if we named, instead of open text var, we called this like, user response or something like that, or u response. I'm just gonna go ahead and change that for the people who like have a good idea of what's going on here, because now it's not just the open text variable that we're collecting from storyline. We're just passing in whatever the user's response variable is. So hope that didn't confuse anyone. You can leave it how it was before. Again, what you call it doesn't matter. This is just a bit more accurate now that we made it work with the multiple choice questions. All right, so right here, we added this qCorrect parameter. So when we execute the code, we're going to pass in either a true or a false variable, depending on whether or not the user answered the question correctly. And what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down, and we're going to replace this success placeholder with qCorrect. Okay. So this is going to work at the question level, and I'll show you how. So, we added qCorrect as a parameter. We put it down here with this result success property. And now in storyline, with each of these choices, we have to add to the end of it whether or not it's correct or incorrect. So choice A is not correct, so we're going to add a false here. Boolean values don't need to be in quotes. So we've been passing in strings in all these other places, and a Boolean value is a true or false value. It's a JavaScript thing. So what, see like how a number we don't put in quotes, but like a string we do. A Boolean, which will be either true or false, we do not put in quotes. Okay? So these are the two possible options for the success property. So again, we're using a placeholder Q correct, but when we fill that in, we want it to just be true or false with no quotes. I hope that's clear. So I'm going to run through this quickly. So we're going to add false to choice A. We're going to add false to choice B. Choice C is correct here, so we want to pass true for that one. I'm going to do the same things on questions 2 and 3. So red is not correct. Blue is correct. And again, if this seems a bit unwieldy, having to add all this for each thing, we are going to use a better approach to our xAPI statements. So instead of using this one send statement function for everything, we're going to have more specific functions like a send answered function and a send passed or a send failed function. So we're going to get to that later. It's going to make this code a lot more clear. But for now, we're making do with what we've got. We're just adding on to this beast. 22 is incorrect, so we're going to do false. 45, I think, is correct, so that's true. 17 is false. All right. So this might be as far as we're going to be able to get for this week. Because again, this right here is not going to change based off of, because if maybe we want to know if they passed the quiz as a whole. Okay. Do you want me to show you how we would add that code? It's going to get a bit more complex and you might not understand exactly what's going on, but we can figure that out on the call here if you want, or we can dive right into publishing and make sure that this works at the question level. What do we want to do? We have 15 minutes. I guess it's okay if we run a little over if you want to see what we would do. Because basically what I'm talking about is right now we're saying, oh yeah, the user answered choice C, or the user answered, choice blue, and that is correct. The user answered 22 and that's incorrect. That's all fine. But what if on this side we want to send a statement saying the user passed this quiz and it was either a true success or a false fail? That's what we don't have in place right now. That will take a little bit to get in place, and we can do that if you want to see it. I guess we can throw together a poll. Want to add the all right. Everybody answer this poll. Do you want to add the quiz pass or fail functionality? It's going to take a little bit. And it's a little bit more complex, but we will do it if you want to do it. Okay, it's looking like an overwhelming yes. So let's get creative here. So let's think about what's going on. So right now we're passing true or false based on whether or not the user is passing the question. It looks like we could use this same parameter to pass true or false based on whether or not the user is passing the quiz. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do this quickly. If you're familiar with Storyline, this is going to be simple. I'm going to add a new layer called pass, and I'm going to add a new layer called fail. Okay. On the fail layer, I'll just add some text. You failed. How unfortunate. Let's make it bigger. Okay, I'm going to copy this text. I'm not going to dim it. I'm going to paste it on the pass layer, and I'm going to call it you pass. Okay. So basically what we're doing now is we're just handling this in Storyline. So this is actually going to be easier than I thought. So on this base layer, we want to show the pass layer. So we're going to show layer pass when the timeline starts if the user's score is equal to the max score. So we'll say we need to get a 100% to pass this quiz. It's only 3 questions. It should be easy enough. So if the user score is equal to the max score, we're showing the pass layer. Now I'm just going to copy that trigger and paste it. I'm going to open it back up, and we're going to show the fail layer when the timeline starts if the user's score is less than the max score. Okay, so now if the user score is 0, 1, or 2, it will show the fail layer. And that's what we want, so I'm going to press OK. Oh, no. Okay, cool. So now we have that storyline functionality set up. We just need to add the xAPI statements appropriately. So I'm gonna copy the execute JavaScript trigger from this correct option on question 3. So you can, if you only have question 1, you can just copy it from like choice C. Just copy and execute JavaScript trigger, and let's paste it onto this pass layer. Okay, so it'll say execute JavaScript when the user clicks. I'm gonna open this up. We want to execute that JavaScript when the timeline starts on this layer. So when the user gets to this pass layer, we're going to send some JavaScript. So let's open up the JavaScript we're executing. We're saying we're using this answered verb. That's not right. We need to get the past verb. So let's go to xapi.vocab.pub. We'll go to browse and verbs. I'll paste this for you all. I'm sorry to those of you who voted no here. If you publish what we had so far, it will work. Hopefully, at least. I guess we'll find out soon. I'm searching for this past verb. Here's an ADLNet one. I want to use that. Indicates that the actor passed an activity. That's perfect. I'm going to copy that verb ID. And now I'm just going to paste it in over this answered verb ID. And instead of saying answered as this first argument we're passing, we're going to call it passed. And instead of question 3, we're going to name this quiz 1. Okay. So again, if in the object ID, I'm going to change that to from question 3 or whatever you had, question 1, question 2, it doesn't matter. We're changing it to quiz 1. And now instead of question in my sample quiz, we're going to name this my sample quiz. It's not a question type, okay? This is a quiz. So we need to go over to the activity types. We're going to browse and go to activity types. And let's see if quiz is an activity type. No, assessment maybe. Printed assessment, no. School is, oh, here we go at the very top. Assessment, activity type that determines a learner's mastery of a particular subject area. Yes. In this case, our subject area is a bit all over the place, but this is just a sample. So we're going to pull this assessment activity type, and that's what we will pass instead of the question activity type. So we don't want to pass a response here, okay? We're not going to have anything in the result object because the user isn't answering a question here. So we're just going to pass placeholder, because remember we set up that placeholder variable that's just set to nothing. And finally, this last argument is going to be what shows up in the success part of the xAPI statement. So we're going to pass true because they're on this pass screen. So I'm going to copy and paste this so everyone, can see what we're working with. And once you have that trigger, I'm just going to copy that, execute JavaScript trigger, and I'm going to paste it on the fail layer. And it should be much easier to modify now. Instead of passed, we want failed. So I'm going to go back to this verbs list. I'm going to search for failed. Sure enough, here we go. I'm going to copy the ID, paste that for you all. So I'm gonna swap out passed for failed, swap out this passed URI for this failed URI. All of the quiz stuff is good. Yes, it's an assessment type. Yeah, we want to pass the placeholder, but instead of true, we're passing false. Okay? Because this is not a successful quiz pass. So if you made it that far, we should be good to go here. We're going to publish this and test it. Again, we're moving fast here because we don't have a ton of time. I hope this pace was okay. I think we moved quicker through some things than we usually would have. But let's publish this thing and see if it's working like we want it to. So collect quiz score. So we'll publish it to the desktop as usual. And we're publishing it as a web HTML5 object. We're going to open it up once it's published. I know I'm going to have to add those script tags to the story.html file. So I'm going to open that with my code editor. And now, like I've shown you all before, I'm going to go to, last week's storyline output, and I'm just going to copy what I want from there. So I know I want this xAPI wrapper file, and I know I'm going to need to copy those script tags from this story.html file. So I copied the wrapper file. I'm going to go back to my published output that I just published and paste that wrapper file. Now I'm in the old story file. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and copy these script tags. I'm going to hop back over to my new story file and paste those script tags right above the closing body tag. So I'll share that in the chat. Those are the script tags we want to paste. Just make sure where it says xAPI-statement.js that you name it whatever you named your JavaScript file that we were working on right here. And that's the last thing we need to do. Oh, wait. Make sure you save this file after you add these script tags. So file save or Control S. And then in this JavaScript file we've been working on and adding all of this stuff to, I'm going to do file, save as, and make sure we save it in our new storyline output file using that same name we added via the script tag. Okay. And now it's the moment of truth. So I'm going to open up my Learning Record Store. I'm also going to double click this story.html file to open it up in my browser. Okay. So let's say our name is Devlin Quiz, just so we can clearly see which ones are Devlin at quiz.com, just so we can see which statements are from today. So I didn't add a trigger to the submit button, so I'm just going to use the next button. What is the correct answer? We'll say choice A. What is the correct color? Well, we know it is blue. What's the correct number? Oh, I'm not sure. Let's view the cheat sheet. Oh, okay, 45. We failed because we got that one wrong. Let's see if the LRS knows that we failed. Sure enough, it does. So here's our data from today. Devlin answered question 1. I'm going to configure this, and I'm going to turn off this stored component, and I want to see the responses. I want to know what I'm answering. Uh-oh. Let's see here. Okay, so if we extend this xAPI statement, so Devlin answered question 1, we can see we're answering question 1. We can see the score. My score is 0 right now because I got that first one wrong. If we look at my response to question 2, something's wrong here because it's saying that our raw score is still okay. So it worked on question 3. So question 3 shows that we were 1 for 3. Let's see what could have gone wrong here. So question 2, it looks like it didn't register this blue option. Oh, here's the issue. So we're executing this JavaScript to send the xAPI statement before we're adding 1 to the user's score. So the JavaScript is getting the score before it ever adds 1. And I'm guessing the same thing is happening with question 3. So we can see here with question 3 that the raw score is 1, but that's the 1 from question 2, if that makes sense, because it's sending the statement before it ever actually adds 1. So we need to send these things to the top, and that's why it wasn't including the user's response, because it was sending the xAPI statement before we set Q2 response to the value that we're actually going with. So we need to adjust these triggers and make sure that the JavaScript is executing after these variables are set appropriately. So the last trigger needs to be jump to the next slide. The second to last needs to be execute the JavaScript. And then those first ones need to be where we're changing the variables. So I know we're at time. If anyone needs to head out, go ahead and head out. But I'm going to go ahead and fix this up and republish it so we can see it all in working order like we want it to be. So you can do this in your file as well if you're following along. Okay, that one's good. And now we just need to do question 3. So that one's good. And then this one. Okay, so I think we're in good shape now. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to republish it. Okay, it's saved. I'm just going to add a 1 here to differentiate. Again, I'm going to do this super fast. We're going to open the story file. We're going to copy these script tags from the old one, paste it in right above this closing body tag. And now we need to actually get those files into our course. So this is from the one we just tested. I'm just going to copy and paste them right in, and now we should be good to go. So that's how fast that is once you get the hang of it. So Devlin Quiz 1 will be my new name. Okay, so we're in this again. So let's say we want to pass it all this time. Okay, we want to get it all correct. So the answer here is choice C. The answer here is blue. The answer here is 45. We passed. Let's check out this statement stream. And here we go. We're looking good. I do want to add this success property to the statement stream so you can see how that's functioning as well. So Devlin Quiz 1 answered question 1. He answered C, and that's true. That was a success. Question 2, we answered blue. That's also true. Question 3, we answered 45. That's true. And then we passed quiz 1, so the success property is true. So likewise, if we do it the other way around, so we'll just answer everything incorrectly now. We'll refresh this. And sure enough, same thing. We can see exactly what response we put on each of these. We can see that the success is false. Same thing for the quiz. And if we extend this, we can see that xAPI object we set up with the, exactly as it looks in our code over here. It's the full JSON xAPI statement right here in our LRS. If there are any questions, let me know. Thank you for hanging out around here. Oh, it looks like we finished just a little bit over time. We covered a lot. It never fails that we have, some little thing that we need to troubleshoot now that we're getting into these later tutorials and just adding so much on here. So thanks for hanging around. If you are getting value out of these, please consider donating to keep it all going. Next week is my favorite, I think. I'm going to double check that. Yeah, next week we're measuring duration. So that's awesome. That's how we're going to see exactly how long people are spending on a specific slide, resource, question, quiz, the course as a whole, all sorts of good stuff. So that's next week. And then finally, the week after that, we're going to start making this xAPI send statement function a bit easier to manage and grapple with. Feel free to, send me questions about this if anything was confusing. I'll be around all week to help out. And yeah, please consider putting together a project that we can show off, once we get through all 10 of these, because I think it'll be awesome to show off these skills, put it in your portfolio. big tech companies like Amazon specifically, they're always mentioning xAPI in their job postings. So, I think when we started off, there were over 100 people viewing that first session, and now we're down to like 10 who are here over the course of this one, on and off. So you guys are the ones who are sticking it out. Yeah, thanks for coming. Proud of you all if you're able to get this stuff working. It's good stuff, and I hope you've been learning a lot about JavaScript, xAPI, and maybe a little bit about Storyline too. So I'm gonna call it a day here. I'll be around, and I'll hopefully see you all next week. Bye-bye.